Okay, so a couple of weeks back, I had done a video on Disney's direct-to-video sequels and basically concluded that it's impossible to know if any of them were actually even good or not. And you can find a link in the description to that video in case you'd like to check it out for yourself. But after thinking the whole thing over, I started thinking that maybe those sequels weren't all bad, as some of them did lead to an interesting spin or take on their respective original movie. And one that I believe may have just benefited the most from this was Lilo and Stitch. Though never meant to be a franchise, its sequels nonetheless did offer some very interesting and unique ideas that wouldn't have worked in the original movie. And today, I'd like to quickly go over how the Lilo and Stitch franchise may have just been Disney's best use of the direct-to-video sequel format of any movie that got one. And obviously there will be spoilers ahead for the entire series, so in case you don't want anything ruined, you should probably come back to this video another day. And also, this is not me ranking these movies or arguing for their overall quality, just looking at how each one did an effective job of continuing the story set up by the first movie. Okay, so to get right into it, first we have the original Lilo and Stitch. The story of a bioweapon that learns the value of love, family, and compassion through a lonely little girl. This movie is already considered a classic among Disney fans, so needless to say, it did a pretty good job of telling its story. And while it ends on a pretty definitive note, to the point that you could easily watch this as a standalone movie, it wasn't impossible for the story to continue. And that's what leads us into Lilo and Stitch 2, Stitch Has a Glitch. Now, probably the most traditional Disney direct-to-video sequel of the bunch, the movie nonetheless does a decent job of telling its story and reinforcing the themes of the first movie. It's not a necessary story to be told, but at the very least it does nothing to take away from the first one, and to some people might even add something of value to it. But then we get to Stitch the movie. Technically released before Stitch Has a Glitch, but clearly taking place afterwards, this movie is where things got interesting. Taking advantage of the fact that Stitch's experiment number was 626, the movie reveals that Jumba had created 625 other experiments, all of which have rather different and interesting abilities. Though at the same time, the movie itself isn't exactly remarkable, considering it's meant to simply be a pilot movie to the Lilo and Stitch TV show. But honestly, if you're looking at it strictly that way, it does its job rather well, especially in establishing the characters and only some of the obstacles they're going to face in the series. And it also manages to have one or two moments of genuine emotion as well. But on the whole, as I already said, it's simply meant to be a pilot for the TV series, but does a good enough job at it while effectively introducing a new concept. And then we get to Leroy and Stitch, which, similar to Stitch the movie, is also not anything special but does its intended job very well, which, in this case, is wrapping up all the loose ends of the series. Is it predictable and somewhat cliche? Sure, but it's not all that bad either, and I'm sure something that any kid who was a fan of the series wouldn't be disappointed by. And not to mention, it does have its redeeming moments, such as when Jumba listens to the Elvis record or the climax, where they actually do a pretty good job of showing how each individual experiment uses their talents to their advantage. But again, in the end it mostly just does its job of tying up loose ends, and in that regard it does that job pretty well, but not much else. Okay, so the point here mainly comes down to the fact that none of these sequels, and even the TV show, were exactly necessary additions to the first movie, but at least after Stitch Has a Glitch, they took the story in a somewhat different and interesting direction to give the series something new to work with instead of retreading the same things over and over again. Because again, it worked out okay for Stitch Has a Glitch, but it wouldn't have if they had just kept doing it that way. I guess my point here is, if Disney had done all of their direct-to-video sequels the way they handled their sequels to Lilo and Stitch, perhaps they would be more well-liked today, or at the very least not as universally hated and despised. Okay, that's all I've got on that. So now I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that the Lilo and Stitch franchise might have just done the best job out of any Disney property as far as actually telling an interesting and different story with its unnecessary follow-ups goes? Or do you believe it was all just the same direct-to-video garbage? Please feel free to discuss your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, you don't have to agree with anything I said here. You can feel any way about any of these movies that you want to. And thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.